Well, good morning. What a pleasure to be with all of you today. I wanted to talk with you a little bit about what is regenerative agriculture, and I mostly wanted to really try to give some inspiration and empower you to use your voices, to use your talents to this big issue that we have with climate, because as I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about my own story, I want to encourage you to do some of your own reflection and think about your voice, your story, and why it matters, because I want to tell you that it does. So who am I? I'm the daughter of Ken and Maria. I was born just a few miles from the Atlantic Ocean in Atlantic County, New Jersey. My mom was a dietitian, and my dad hated food waste. So I loved Josh, our last speaker, who said his family taught him, if it's useful, use it, because that's how I think about food. I hate waste. So composting in my own home is a joy. But grew up in a family with a big food culture, and that is really part of what inspires me to do what I do now. I was always excited about science. I think you can't grow up near the ocean and not have a real wonder for the environment and the natural world. I finished undergraduate. I have an undergraduate degree in biology from Fordham University. It's a Jesuit school in New York. I worked for a few years in New York in between going back for my master's, which I started in 2009. And I only tell you these things because it's like the arc of your life will take you places that you don't expect, right? The most common question I get now is like, well, what are you doing in Nebraska? You're from New Jersey, right? Which I've come to just embrace. Like, go where your passion will take you if you have the opportunity to. And so I have a master's degree in applied climate science from Columbia University. And I did that because I was so interested in this issue of climate. I remember learning about it a little bit in college and thinking, like, this is the most important issue of my lifetime, right? So here I am, almost 20 years past that point, and it still is, and it's still where I am, kind of merging climate and agriculture. So I got a lot of inspiration from some of the folks that I was exposed to at Columbia University. With my interest in food and a desire to do more research, ended up at Iowa State University on a project that had to do with climate and agriculture. And so again, I share all that because your story, it matters. And again, just to describe the background I have of merging climate and agriculture, you know, I've been here since the end of 2017. This is my 8th year. And have finally gotten more involved with distinctly climate-related projects. So the work that I do mostly now has to do with what some people might call regenerative agriculture. I really think about it more as soil health, soil conservation. How do we have crops and plants on the ground all year round to conserve our soils? That's really the way that I think about it. I'll say just a bit more about that. But you know, I've worked so hard for so long, and I finally got an opportunity to try to think about climate and agriculture and what are the ways climate can be an adaptation solution. What are those things that we need? And I was invited to be on, this slide is intentional, a co-author on the National Climate Assessment that was published in 2023. And I'm still really proud of something that, this accomplishment in my career, right? So this got published in 2023, and now it's dark. So when Ken invited me and I was thinking about coming today to talk to all of you, I know that it is a very hard political time, because to have my work dark like this, I mean, you can access the report, but the main page of the National Climate Assessment that we're to use in all sectors to make decisions for our future is not available right now. And so what did I do on this chapter? I was a co-author on the Northern Great Plains chapter, and I wrote about what I'll talk more about today, which is the ways that soil health and farmers in Nebraska are already shifting to adapt to climate risks, right? So I was thinking about what can I say to all of you to give some inspiration, and as I will encourage you to do today, and the people that you meet, you're probably sitting with friends from your own school. I hope you will meet some new people, because I get lots of inspiration from my friends, from my professional network, and I was talking with some friends. I got to visit this past week with a close friend from graduate school who we had a good chat about somebody that we all interacted with at Iowa State University named Fred Kirschman, who passed away just a few weeks ago. And he is someone that I got a lot of inspiration from. So we're going to listen to Fred just for like 2 minutes here in a minute. But who was Fred? Why am I telling you about this 9-year-old person who just passed away, who was important to me and many of my colleagues? So Fred was a director at the Leopold Center for Sustainable Agriculture at Iowa State University. He was a farmer from North Dakota. He was a philosopher, a theologian, a minister, and he wrote very clearly and articulately about an ecological conscience. So his most probably famous writing was called Cultivating the Ecological Conscience essays from Farmer Philosopher, which if you're interested in it, I encourage you to go back to some of the basics. Wendell Berry and Aldo Leopold, right, wrote about these things. Now it seems fancy and lots of people are talking about regenerative agriculture, but there are some really basic writings from the past, I think, that we can learn a lot from. So I will not forget, I'm just going to tell you a brief story. In 2011, when I started at Iowa State University, I got involved with some students who wanted to plan some activities around Food Day, which is a national and international event that happens in October, and different people plan events to raise awareness about food and agriculture issues. And I remember reaching out to Fred, who was then a scholar at the Leopold Center, and I knew he was this big giant and so famous. And I just wrote to him to get some advice about, I can't even remember exactly what I asked about, and he wrote me back within like 5 minutes, and I was so flattered by that. I'm just so appreciative. That was the first interaction I had with Fred. He was so kind, and he was so generous with his time and knowledge, and I really want to encourage you all to do that too. It's the way I try to run with my students, with my research group. How can we, if we know something and other people need to know it, how do we share it? How do we really be generous with our knowledge? And that's really who Fred was. And so I want to just play for you as a transition into what is regenerative agriculture and a little bit about my work and some motivation for Nebraska, some of Fred's words. But before I do that, what are some things that I've learned from Fred that I've already said just to underscore it, right? I encourage you to read and read some of the older things. Always be a learner. If you're here, I trust that that's the orientation that you have in your lives, and really just to support and uplift each other. So it was so meaningful to me as a first-year graduate student. I was new in Iowa. I'd just come from New York. Like, what did I know? But Fred made me feel welcome. He didn't make me feel like I didn't belong there, right? So, and he did that with all of my classmates. He was always so supportive of what we were doing as students. And his messages and his writing are so clear and wonderful. So if our video works, I want to just play about 2 minutes of Fred talking about his life. So if you could go to the video just for about 2 minutes. So I want you to just hear a little bit of what he had to say about farming, his farm in North Dakota.
Life.
And then
when
we'll
I
come
thought
back.
about sustainability on my own farm, and we started to transition our farm to organic back in 1976. And I want to be clear, that does not necessarily mean that because we transitioned it to organic that we were sustainable. Because one of the things I'm going to argue today is that just being organic does not automatically put you into the category of, or into the camp of sustainability. But we were concerned. We decided to transition our farm to organic. I didn't even know there was such a thing as an organic market in 1980 when we first started to qualify after 3 years of transition. We entered into that primarily because of a student of mine who actually introduced me to organic agriculture. His name was David Vetter, whom some of you may know. And what David helped me to understand, due to research that he did as a research assistant at the University of Nebraska, was what happened to the quality of soil when you managed land organically, and by real organic management, which pays attention to soil quality, as compared to when you simply manage it conventionally. And the difference was dramatic. And that impressed me so that when I went back to manage our farm back in 1976, I decided that that's what we were going to do. And I saw that purely in terms of a steady state situation. Here we had a farm. We had to figure out how to transition that farm to a different kind of farming that reduced our soil erosion, that reduced our impact on the environment, all of those things. It was very much a steady state kind of thing. We needed to make some changes, in effect, kind of green up the farm, if you will. Well, I want to argue that we're at a point now in our history when that concept of sustainability is no longer adequate. Simply greening up what we're doing is not going to get us to sustainability, because we are now moving into a future that has a series of very, very important challenges that are going to fundamentally change the way we all have to do things. And so now, instead of thinking of sustainability as a steady state concept, we have to think about it as a concept of resilience. Because we need to figure out systems, whether you're a farmer or running a business or whatever you're doing, we have to figure out a way to do that that has resilience built into the concept, because if we don't, then we're not going to be sustainable given the challenges that we're going to be facing.
Well, what were some of the words that you all heard him say about like farming practices or what he learned? Any words that stood out to you? Just call them out. Organic, resilience, system, sustainable. He talked about soil quality. He talked about how he saw the shift on his own farm and how it was able to reduce soil erosion, right? So he did not use regenerative. This clip is about 15 years old now, right? So I don't even know if people were using that term. But I think the simplicity of the description is valuable, right? So we're just talking about a broad suite of principles that I really refer to in my own work, more around soil health management, and this idea that the soil is a living organism, it is alive, it should sustain life of many forms, and that it should support the functioning biologically, chemically, and physically of itself. And so I did want to make mention too, in Fred's video, he mentions Nebraska. How many people have heard of David Vetter? Anyone? Okay, so a handful of us, right? So David Vetter is a manager of the Grain Place and the foundation and the organic processing facility that is in Marquette, so it's just in central Nebraska. And David Vetter is one of the leading advocates and doers of organic agriculture on his family's farm. It's been an organic for 70 plus years now, right? And so Dave was a student of Fred's, and he taught him everything he knows. Fred went on to become a real advocate and leader in the organic space as it was growing in its popularity, right? I also really like that Fred says that organic does not necessarily mean sustainable. So I guess I say all this not to confuse you in terms of what's regenerative, organic, but to me it's about the soil and how are we managing it in such a way to sustain it. And so when I think about what is soil health, I often think about, and you'll hear people talk about these 5 principles about covering the soil with residue, with roots, minimizing disturbance, having diversity with livestock and different crops. And so I'm going to just make real mention. So I want to show you this visual from a project that I worked on where we looked at infiltration rates. So infiltration is the ability of soil to absorb water, and it's really important when we think about heavy rain. And so when I think about regenerative agriculture, lots of people like to talk about what are the carbon opportunities, the mitigation potential of agriculture, but I really think a lot about the adaptation. I think a lot about the water. Later in Fred's clip, he talks about what are some of these challenges. He talks about energy, and he talks about the Ogallala Aquifer, which we know as Nebraskans we are meant to be stewards of. So regenerative, soil health, to me, these are suites of practices that are really meant to promote soil conservation. Again, the work that we do thinking about continuous roots in the soil. So sometimes people like to use these infographics. I like to show them just as an example of how we can improve soil structure, carbon in the soil, such that that can have better outcomes when it comes to water. So again, infiltration is something that I've thought a lot about. Here, water retention, and putting some big numbers to that are shown in the infographics here. So healthier soil, better water outcomes is really something that we focus on and that I hear farmers talk about quite a bit. So we've done a lot of work about infiltration rates, and some of this from the diagram that I showed you here. But what we found in some of the work that we've done is that if we want to increase water in the soil and offsetting some of those impacts of very heavy rain events, we want to have roots in the soil. So it's really the emphasis in my research group. We do research on things like cover crops. We're doing work with perennial crops. We are doing some research now with perennial cover crops. It's pretty interesting and exciting. It can be challenging for farmers. It can cost more in money and labor until you really get over that learning curve, but can also lead to profit and better, broader outcomes. So that's kind of all the science that I really want to share, but I love this quote from farmers. So no one loves a farmer quote about infiltration more than me. So farmers is something they really like to brag about, right? This is not something that's just getting you an immediate return on, bushels per acre every year, but something like this, that we had a heavy rain event of 6 inches and the neighbor's field had a lot of ponding, and my field was just, all that water was soaked up, and that's what we want. We want rain to stay in the soil, not to run off, not to carry with it soil and nutrients via loss. So we want good infiltration, and lots of farmers are very keen to share their stories of better water infiltration. So when I think about what are options for us, again, regenerative conservation soil health, to me, there are differences and nuances in the definition, but just this idea of there are things that we know that have been studied for a long time that can have a lot of benefit to, yes, protect the soil, and it will protect us, as was Fred's mantra. So this is just some work I'm showing you here about soil lifespan. So some of you, has anyone heard this idea that we have about 40 harvests left? That there's some of us have heard this, right? And this is work that tried to define across the world for compiling different studies. How long does it take to erode or to lose the top 12 inches of soil? Because once we've lost that, it's really hard to grow a good crop. And so what they found is that from the studies they were able to compile, that about 16% of soils globally only have about 100 years in their lifespans. But that conservation measures, so doing things like cover cropping or minimizing tillage, they have several different practices they include in that category, could expand the lifespan of soils to 10,000 years. It's a huge difference. There's other work that substantiates this idea. I just want to remind us too, this is happening in Nebraska, right? So 2019 was the last wettest year. Before this year, it feels like it has hardly rained since that year. So I don't know what our soil loss looks like this year, but I do know that from 2019, there were watersheds in southeast Nebraska where there's some modeling work that's done by former colleagues of mine at Iowa State University, that would take 100 years to replace. When we think about what soil is breakdown, the weathering of rock or parent material or soil that's moved, or materials that have moved in from other places, and it's a really slow process that it takes to rebuild soil. And in 1 year, we can lose what takes us 100 years to replace. And so that's why the imperative of what are these measures we can take to try to slow that are really important, because agriculture, just at its core, is an extractive process. To feed ourselves, we interact with the environment, but how can we do that in a way that is as slow to reduce the resources or possibly even to regenerate them? And so we know there are some options that we have. And we're doing some of them in Nebraska, right? So Nebraska and Kansas already are two leading states in terms of acreage of no-till. So that means no soil disturbance. It's about half of our cropland acres, which is something for us to be proud of. We have increased the number of acres we have of cover crops from 2012 to 2022. It's more than doubled, which is also something to be very proud of, but there's still a lot of room for opportunity and growth. That's only about 4 to 5% of our cropland acres. So a lot of room to grow and improve, and that's part of what I want to leave you with in terms of what you can do. So I'm glad to see that there are some folks who come from rural backgrounds, but again, I didn't, and it doesn't mean that your voice doesn't matter and that you don't get to have a say about something that you do 3 times a day. I hope so, and eat well. All of us as eaters, in my perspective, have an opportunity to be engaged in our food system, right? So I think raising awareness about what are practices that can be beneficial is really important, because you might already pay taxes if you're already working, but as people in the public, our money goes to support our farming systems, right? So that goes to crop insurance, it goes to conservation programs. We're talking about billions of dollars a year, right? That is our money at the end of the day. So I encourage you to be aware, and I assume pretty well everybody is from Nebraska. You will carry more weight in some circles than I will, right? I have to defend that. Why are you here? You're from New Jersey, right? Even though, I don't know, I've paid property taxes for 8 years here. Is that good enough? But you're from Nebraska and you know it. And if you're not, growing up on the farm, then you have neighbors or family who did. And so you just have an innate sense of what it is to be a part of a state that is one of the lead agricultural states in the U.S. So I want to encourage you that you have very important voices, and that the idea of healthy soils really supports urban and rural communities. So that's what I want to leave you with, as getting ready to talk to you is me coming up with inspiration in what is a hard time, but I'm leaning on you, and I encourage you to lean on each other. And again, I would just say soil can be a solution to many of the challenges that we face. And this is probably the most famous photo of me that's running around the internet. Practical Farmers of Iowa is a great organization if you're looking for farmers who are already doing this and supporting each other. And they have this great campaign about Don't Farm Naked. So I'll leave you with that, and I think we have a few minutes for questions. Thank you.
We can do 1 or 2 questions if you want.
Yeah, you're in charge.
Feels funny with the microphone. Because the success of regenerative agriculture measures does vary based on like crop, region, and the measure you're using. Do you have a hard time like being able to quantify it or a way that you would recommend it to farmers and be able to show like this works for where you are and what you're farming?
What a great question. Yeah, I would say it is a challenge because the more local you can make the response, the better. And that's part of the reason I like to promote doing research on people's farms, or looking into on-farm research. We have a really great on-farm research network at the university, but yeah, it is a challenge. But I feel sometimes that gets used as a little bit of a mental barrier. Oh, well, I don't know exactly how it would work, which is true, but try it on a small scale, you know? So yes, everything in agronomy depends. The location, the soil, environment, the year, situation, equipment, all that. But all of those principles, I mean, these are things that people have been studying for a long time. And broadly, when you look at these kind of synthetic studies, they show positive effects. But that's not to say that it doesn't take time to learn how to make it work on your own farm. But that's a very sophisticated question. And yes, it can be a challenge.
Okay, so I live in Lincoln and I have a yard. What do you do that could inform me?
Well, I would say backyard farming, growing your own food is a way to empower yourself. Of course, that's a smaller scale. There are people who are converting their lawns to less water and input intensive land covers, composting. So we have a great Master Gardener program. We could talk more, but have you heard of Tim Wren and Holly Hamlin, and just walk on by them or reach out to them? That they're doing on an urban space is really incredible. So we have a local example of how you could make the use of your own property to grow food, or at least use less water and fertilizer. Good question. Composting's my favorite. And our flowers and bird feeders.